Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and tonight is open mic night. That is your opportunity to ask me some questions, and you can do that by clicking on the link below and submitting your questions in advance so that I can do whatever research that I need to in order to do so. Now today I'm actually doing this recording from a hotel room, so please apologies for the lack of background and the stark lighting and all those sorts of things, but I've got an action-packed show for you with a whole bunch of questions that have come in, so I'm going to go straight to the very first question, and it comes from Anne. So Anne's question is, regarding the new reforms for granny flats in Victoria, would single dwelling covenants trigger a planning permit requirements? And if this reform would change the landscape of small unit developments in some areas where many blocks could have those granny flats in their backyard? So that's a long-winded question, but essentially if I break it down into its nuts and bolts, Victoria have got some brand new granny flat reforms, which means that now you can actually rent the granny flat to someone other than granny, which now opens up a whole bunch of opportunities for, putting in secondary dwellings onto a property. But in contrast to that, there is a very, very common thing in Melbourne called a single dwelling covenant. Single dwelling covenant says only one dwelling on that title. And so, yes, those two are actually in conflict. And so you will need to remove the single dwelling covenant in order to get that across the line. Now, not too long ago, and I can't remember exactly the episode, but probably about 6 months ago, one of our meetups in Melbourne, we were talking all about removing covenants, and in particular single dwelling and that was by a gentleman by the name of Lewis O'Brien from Lewis O'Brien Associates. So please, if you are an annual member, please make sure that you actually go back and look at the back catalogue of recordings for all of our meetups and find that particular episode, and that'll give you the insights into what needs to be done to remove a single dwelling covenant, if it's humanly possible. And I say if, because not all single dwelling covenants can be removed. Some of the challenges that you need to actually understand are who are the impacted parties, and typically that covenant will actually have a whole bunch of other properties that are named as interested parties in that. And so you'll need sign off from all of those people, or take that all the way through to court in order to fight your case. So can be done. It's not always successful. Go and speak. Firstly, get a copy of that covenant, take that to your local town planner and or solicitor, and see whether or not there's any opportunity for actually that to be removed. So that's that one. Boy, that was a big one. Andy's question is, what is the best level of security when you are a money partner? Are personal guarantees worth anything? And what key metrics should you look at when giving money to a developer? Super interesting question. And I have to be super careful here that I can't give legal advice, accounting advice, or financial planning advice. And so this is one of those things where I can talk general in nature only, and you need to go and speak and in particular to your solicitor in this particular instance with regards to security. But that said, there are levels of security, and so there are layers to how this starts to go. So you would be very familiar with the fact that if you have a bank, when you're purchasing a property, they typically have a mortgage over your property. More specifically, it's referred to as a first mortgage. And so they have priority. They sit there first, and because they are the first mortgage, if they need to recall the loan, the mortgage allows them the ability to recall the loan because you've breached the terms of the loan, and they can actually sell that property in order to recoup their money. Now, that's pretty well known by everybody, but the next layer would be that you could put a second mortgage on top of it. Now, second mortgage equally has the power to sell down your property, but in order to do so, the order of priority says that they must pay the first mortgagee back before the second mortgager can actually receive any money. So they are sitting higher in the stack. Okay, there's a thing called a capital stack, and this is now them sitting higher in that stack. So then you could equally have third, fourth, fifth mortgages, etc., but you tend to not come across them very often, because once you get past second mortgage, I guess it starts to get diluted, and it's, I guess, much harder for, I guess, someone who's third or fourth ranked in order to actually call in the loan and still have enough money to pay everybody else back in the first place. So then it tends to escalate. So mortgage allows you the ability to sell down the property. Okay, then it tends to next level of security is a thing called a caveat. Now, a caveat does not give you the ability to sell a property. As a matter of fact, it's the exact opposite. What it is it's like a padlock or a black mark that goes onto the title. And that black mark sits on the title, and anyone who wants to interact with that title in any way, shape or form sees the black mark, and they know that they have to interact with and or engage with yourself in order to resolve whatever has caused that black mark. Okay, so for example, if the first mortgagee wanted to sell the property, they need to come and speak to the caveator in order, I think it's caveator, the person holding the caveat, and get their permission and resolve whatever the dispute is with them to their satisfaction before they can actually sell down the property. So now the problem is, there might not be a reason to sell the property for 10, 20, 30 years. And so your caveat might sit there dormant, doing nothing for a very, very long period of time. Whereas the mortgagee can actually call that loan in straight away. You can't if you have a caveat. You have to wait until they want to enact something. Now, there's all sorts of reasons why they want to enact on the title. So, for example, if they're doing a subdivision or townhouse development or something, they want to, I guess, tear up the old title and recreate many, many titles. So if they're doing a 6-pack of townhouses, for example, then they're going to create 6 brand new titles, maybe even a 7th one if there's a shared driveway or some common area. Okay, or if you're doing a 1-2 subdivision, you're going to tear up the original title and create 2 brand new titles. Okay, so either way, you can't do that unless you get the sign off from the person with the caveat. And so it has some power to stop the thing progressing until that matter is actually resolved. But again, it can't call in the loan. Then after that, you then have a personal guarantee. Now, a personal guarantee is only worth something if the person holding the guarantee actually has some assets and liabilities to their name. So if they don't have any assets and liabilities, then a personal guarantee is not really worth the paper it's written on. So you need to make sure that you have a very good understanding of the assets and liabilities of that particular person. Now, a personal guarantee doesn't give you any right to sell anything, but rather an ability to pursue that person in the courts in order for them to, I guess, make good on the outstanding debt. Now, they may have many, many properties that they might have in their possession, or many other assets. Maybe it's a business or something along those lines. You get absolutely no choice at all in controlling which one of those entities you actually sell down in order to pay back the debt. The person, because they gave a personal guarantee, they get to pick and choose which ones that they are. So you might, so they might choose the one that's underperforming but has some cash in it in order to sacrifice, because they don't want to kill the cash cow that's been paying them all this time. And so in doing that, though, there's no guarantee, despite the word guarantee in the personal guarantee title, there's no guarantee they actually have any assets and liabilities. So the onus is on you to make sure that you actually do that due diligence on the person in the first place. In doing so, you should also do some other due diligence checks against that person. You might want to make sure that they've done all their tax returns, and I guess that everything's up to date. You might want to make sure that there's no records against the PPSR register, which is the Personal Property Security Register, and a whole bunch more. And so your solicitor can help you to actually delegate all of those out. Now, the reason why those things are important, because all of those things, as you start to go up what is called the capital stack, as you get higher and higher and higher with less security, you are more closely exposed to the risk. So if the project does not make money, then typically, firstly, you have to lose the potential profit in the deal. Then you have to erode the that the developer actually started to put in. Then you're going to start to pay back your second mortgage and then your first mortgage, as an example. Okay, so the higher you are up the stack, the closer you are to what happens if they lose profit. So I guess do some homework on a thing called the capital stack, and that will start to make a little bit more sense. So there, your options actually sitting in front of you. Now, the higher you are up the stack, I guess the more risk that you're actually taking, and so hence the interest that you're going to earn for that particular loan, or the profit split that you're going to have, is going to be commensurate to the fact that you are, I guess, a little bit more exposed in that process. And so you can have very, very low interest rates. So first mortgage, has been as low as 2-3% in the past. At the moment, they're in the 5s, 6s, and 7s, depending upon the bank that you're actually with. Second mortgages tend to start to ratchet up, and I've seen, I guess, depending upon the level of security, I've seen interest rates at 15, 20, 25, 30% interest rates. Now, typically, that's on a very, very small amount of money for a very small period of time, but definitely have seen those sorts of rates paid in the past. But more particularly, it's typically going to be somewhere I've seen around the 15 to 20% mark, based on those levels of security that you've actually mentioned in there. So hopefully, Andy, that gives you some insights into some of the things that you want to look at. But more specifically, please make sure that you speak to your solicitor. Okay, super important now that you've got some concepts, and have some very detailed conversations as to both the level of risk of that you're exposed to, but also make sure that you actually understand the deal itself, and also the personality of the developer, and make sure they're actually, I guess, of upright standing in the community, irrespective of the amount of assets they may actually have to their name. Everybody has to do deal number one after all, and so in order to do so, they may have to pay, I guess, a little bit of a premium in order to get there. But once they've got some runs on the board and proven themselves, and also got some money in the kitty, then typically they're going to try and move down the stack a little bit, so they're not exposed as much, not paying as much interest, and the like. Next question comes from Elena. So Elena says, I'm 38 years old, female, with good income and 4 investment properties. I don't have a family, partner or kids, and my parents live overseas, and are not Australian citizens. How should I structure my purchases, I guess, considering I'm looking at positively geared long-term investment properties in Queensland in order to reduce tax, protect my assets, and avoid land tax? Elena, this is a really tricky one in that you've actually asked me for some advice that I can't legally give you, because I can't give accounting advice and I can't give asset protection advice. So what I want to give you is just some concepts to go and talk to both your solicitor and your accountant on, and make sure that this is actually going to be something that will actually fit. Now, the legislation in every single state is very different. Now, you've asked specifically for Queensland. I'm quite fortunate that I actually know the legislation in Queensland. I don't know the legislation in all the states off the top of my head, but let me give some insights so that everyone else watching actually understands what we're talking about. Land tax tends to have a couple of different parameters that actually sit behind that. So there's if you have a principal place of residence, or what is called a PPR, typically the place you live, that is typically going to be land tax free. Okay, so what they do is they make an assessment as to whether or not land tax applies, and so that excuse me, so that assessment is made, and then you're deemed to be exempt. So that's process number one. The next one would then be that they go, well, I'm going to put that in some form of an entity. So an entity could be a company or it could be a trust. Okay. Now, in some states, when you have an entity, that automatically triggers the fact that there is no threshold. Oh, sorry. Let me go back a step. I completely forgot one thing. So then you could have an investment property that is in your personal name. Now, when you have it in your personal name, there tends to be a land tax threshold. So you can have, I guess, a certain amount of land in your own personal name up to a threshold. Now, that threshold is different from state to state, okay? But I happen to know for Queensland, at least the last time I checked, and so this figure might not be 1,000% accurate, that it was $600,000. So if you have $600,000 worth of land that is unimproved capital land, then you would breach the threshold and start to pay land tax. But if you are underneath that, it would be land tax free. Now, the next thing is the entity that I was talking about. Now, if you own those same investment properties in an entity, in some states, it's deemed that you would have zero threshold and it instantly triggers land tax. And in other states, you would have a very, very small threshold because they, I guess, want to tax entities or companies which they believe to be a lot more profitable. And I guess in a profit-making type situation, they want to tax those much higher land tax rates. Now, in some states, such as New South Wales, if you own an investment property in an entity, then there is zero threshold, and so you go straight to paying land tax. Okay. In Queensland, there is a threshold of, the last time I checked, $350,000, and so that $350,000, if your land is underneath that, then you would be exempt. Okay. Now, in some states, they have that threshold. But what they do is you might have one entity owning one property and another entity owning another property. And if they're in different entities, you may potentially get a threshold for property number one and entity number one, and a threshold for property number two and entity number two. And so it makes sense to keep them in separate entities. In other states, what they do is they group those together and they say, no, you only get one threshold for all of the entities and all the properties together. So understand those different ways and mechanisms that it can actually be assessed. Now, I happen to know the answer, but I'm not allowed to tell you the answer. I know exactly what it is in Queensland, but I'm not allowed to tell you. So please go talk to your accountant and please go talk to your solicitor. And I guess in this instance, it's really the accountant that's going to give you the advice on how to minimize that land tax. Okay. And the solicitor will be the one who's going to give you the advice on how to do asset protection. And you want to make sure that those two are in alignment wherever humanly possible. So hoping, Elena, that actually helps you without me giving you the answer, to at least know the questions to be asking. Okay, next question comes from Melika. Melika says, has anyone had any luck to achieve BASIC's compliance for the new standards that came out? Because I'm looking to do this for a three-level townhouse project that I'm actually doing. Okay, some of the things I've considered would be, I guess, better performance glazing systems, reducing my window size, wall and roof insulation, a whole bunch more. So let me talk about firstly what BASICs is. It's, I guess, the energy efficiency rating of the property. Now, the changes that Melika is actually talking about is the fact that the new National Construction Code, the NCC, has, I guess, come into effect in some jurisdictions, not all, in order to take what was previously 6-star energy ratings through to 7-star energy ratings. Now, in order to do that, there are a whole bunch of things that will need to start to take place. Now, energy efficiency means that how much energy is needed to warm the house, cool the house, etc., and making sure that everything is, I guess, thermally isolated from the outside world. Now, rather than going into every single one of the different opportunities that actually sit there, instead, I'm actually going to refer you to a previous Sunday session, episode number 161, where Simone Schenkel talked all about energy efficiency of housing, and more specifically a thing called passive homes. Now, passive homes is something that has been around for many years in Europe, where they have much colder temperatures and they need to insulate the houses from the outside environment, I guess, much better than we've had to here in Australia. We've been quite fortunate. We're a very I guess, sun-blessed country, so we've not had to worry too much about the thermal side of things. But with, I guess, global change happening and that sort of thing, energy efficiency is becoming much more of a thing. So the National Construction Code has said any new dwelling moving forward must be a 7-star energy rating. So passive homes enable you to do that. Now, one of the ways that they do that, and I've got a sneeze coming on, so hopefully it doesn't come out in the middle of my sentence. One of the things that it does is actually, I guess, thermally insulate the outside world from the inside world by actually putting almost a I guess the house inside a bubble wrap, for want of a better word. So you're going to have a plastic, I guess, sheet of plastic on the outside of the frame and a sheet of plastic on the inside of the frame, and it actually creates an air gap in between. And what you need to do is make sure that the air gap is then completely sealed at all of the windows and the doors and all that sort of thing. So what we're actually trying to do is stop air from escaping. So what tends to happen in a standard everyday house is you heat up the inside of the house, and the small little gaps under the doors and the small little gaps in the windows and those sorts of things mean that all that energy that you've just heated up then seeps out to the outside world. And so what they're trying to do is stop that leakage of the preconditioned environment that you've got inside the house from actually escaping to the outside world. So that's the logic that sits behind it. But Simone actually goes into that in a lot of depth as to how that actually works. So there's episode 161 of Sunday Sessions. So please go and actually have a look at that. Next one. Alex says, if I were to sell one of my investment properties to a neighbour, can I simply use a conveyancer or lawyer to draw up the section 32? Now, section 32 is very, very specific to Victoria, and it is a disclosure document. Okay, so the disclosure document says everything that is about that particular property, so the incoming purchaser knows exactly what it is they're purchasing. So it's almost like a forced due diligence process for the incoming purchaser to know exactly what they're doing. Now, yes, you can actually have a conveyancer or a lawyer to draw that up, and I highly recommend that in order to have the contract drawn up by them. But the bit that I forgot to ask in the question is, can you do that without using a real estate agent? The answer is yes, you can. So you can actually sell the property yourself, but you need a solicitor to draw up the contract. Now, each state, this is a very different answer. One of the things that you need to know is that every single state does lots of things differently. So conceptually, in Victoria and also New South Wales, you actually need to have the contract drawn up in advance before you actually go out to market. So please make sure that you actually do that. In other states, the contract is drawn up afterwards. So after you've gone to market and actually after you've actually got a purchaser, the contract is actually drawn up at that point. So please understand where you are from a geography perspective, which I'm sure you do, and also the fact that the legislation changes from each place, and go talk to your conveyancer and or lawyer to have that drawn up. Anastasia says, in Queensland, do you usually engage electricity and NBN consultants before or after getting a development approval? Look, so let me firstly talk about what your engage your electrical consultants, what that actually means. So for any development that you're doing in any way, shape or form, there are a number of different elements that you need to do to every single one. So you need to put water onto the site. You need to get electricity to the site. You need to get stormwater off of the site. You need to get telecommunications onto the site. And there's a fifth one. Sewer. So they're the five. So those five need to be in every single instance. So absolutely, you should be doing in your due diligence period before you even lodge an application. Can you get the electricity to the property? And it's not just, hey, are there wires out the front, but is there capacity in those wires to provide the extra load that you're about to do? So you should do that in your due diligence phase. Equally, you should engage with those consultants to see whether there's capacity in the cables for your NBN connections. Now, NBN is not the only broadband provider that you can use in order to get, services to the home, but there are, it is the one that is the default. It's the one that most people actually go to lean on, but there are other suppliers out there that will equally provide broadband services, including satellite type services through the likes of places like Starlink and that sort of stuff as well. Okay, either way, you need to make sure that you've, done that. So before you lodge for your development approval. That way, you don't get caught with any unknowns. So there's no point having a development approval that does not have the ability to actually get constructed. And I've seen that happen many, many times. So please make sure that that is not done. Next, Leanne says, I have a question for the group. Does anyone know if you can do a commercial lease on a residential property? I have a friend who runs a concreting landscaping business and they need somewhere to live and store their trucks, trailers, tools, plus a boat. I have a house and land over 1,000 square meters suitable for them, and wondering if you have a commercial lease, they pay all the outgoings and a 5-year lease. Now, to be brutally honest, Leanne, I don't know the answer to that, but my suspicion would be no, because residential property is only meant to be used for residential purposes. There'll be a whole bunch of rules that are going to sit behind, I guess, the usage of that property and what is actually meant to be used for. They would almost certainly need some form of development approval to be able to run a home business from there. This being your property, you would need to allow them to actually lodge to get that development approval in the first place. But the commercial nature of what they're actually trying to do is typically not what running a business from home is. That's the first part to the question. Then the second part is the lease itself, and pretty sure that, and I'm not sure which geography that you're actually doing this in, but pretty sure in pretty much all of the geographies that I'm aware of, you can't put a commercial lease on a residential property. So now, go and confirm that with your solicitor specifically, but there's 2 problems that are actually sitting in that field. So next one, Alvin. Alvin says, how can you make a profit in selling off the plan, or is it better to build the house and sell? Alvin, this is less about how to make the profit, but more about, I guess, a risk mitigation that you're actually trying to overcome, and I guess the implications of that risk mitigation. So firstly, let's talk about what selling off the plan means. That is selling something that does not yet exist, okay? And so an off the plan contract provides the incoming purchaser with all of the details of what it is that you're trying to sell them. So if it's a house, for example, then it would be I guess the dimensions, the floor plan, the fixtures and fittings, what kind of tiles, what kind of carpet, all those sorts of things. If it's vacant land, it would then just be the dimensions of the property. Are there any easements going in place? Where all the services going to be located, and the like. Either way, you have a disclosure statement that dictates what it is that they are actually buying, and a defined timeline for you to go and create the thing that matches those specifics that you've actually disclosed. Okay, typically that is called a sunset date. So, for example, you might have 2 years in order to go and construct that home, and if you don't finish it within 2 years, then they have the right to terminate the contract and run away. So that's basically an off-the-plan contract in and of its own right. Now, typically what you're going to find is selling off the plan is difficult. And the reason why it's difficult is because the person can't go into the property through an open home, and they can't conceptualize the dimensions of it. They can't see whether the build quality is as you've promised. They can't feel it, touch it, smell it. They don't see it styled or anything like that. So they need to use their imagination. And quite often their imagination is always going to think about the worst case scenario. And so typically you're going to find that they are going to want to have a discount off the list price, because they're just not sure whether or not A, they want to wait that long, and B, whether or not you're going to build to the quality that you've actually promised them. So you've got to be super careful in that. So they're going to ask for a discount. Plus, on top of that, they're going to ask from a discount from a price point that has been demonstrated typically by a valuer. Now, a valuer needs to make sure that they are taking everything into consideration with regards to the value of the property, but they are not allowed to predict the future. So the market might be rising, they might be falling, no idea, but they are talking about a market right here, right now. And so the valuer typically is going to be a little bit conservative in that approach, because they want to make sure that they're not putting their license in jeopardy, because if you don't achieve that sale price, they're going to be, I guess, potentially impacted by that. So basically, you've got a low sale price, and then the incoming purchaser wants to have a discount. Now, that typically is what happens from a process perspective, right? But what it does is it gives you certainty on what that sale price is. And so where you've got a market that is falling and you want to lock in your profits and make sure that you protect your bottom line, it locks that price in. Now, it might take you a little while to actually achieve the sale, but either way, I guess, when it actually does sell, assuming you sell it within the sunset period, you know exactly what you're going to get. So it's a great risk mitigation perspective. The converse of that, though, is if you're going into a rising market, what you've actually done is you've capped your profits, because it's got this glass ceiling, and you may have sold well into the future. So before you determine should you be selling off the plan now, you want to have a fairly good understanding of where the market is and where you think the market is actually going. On top of that, though, that's what you might want, but then the lender that you're actually going to borrow from, they may have a risk position themselves, and they might demand that you sell enough of those properties off the plan to cover maybe 50% of the money that you're about to borrow. They might say 75%. They may even say 100% of the debt coverage. And so they might force you to do the pre-sales. Other lenders, however, will not make you do the pre-sales. Now, the ones who are risk mitigating will typically give you much, much lower interest rates, because you've already taken the risk off the table, whereas the ones who are allowing you to construct straight away are sharing the risk with you, and hence their interest rates tend to be reflective of that by being a little bit higher in nature. So in short, can you make a profit? Absolutely, you can make a profit, but you might potentially be capping your profit, but at the same time, you're taking risk off the table, which means that you can sleep well at night. So I guess it really comes down to whether or not you're one of those people who wants to put all your chips into the center, or whether or not you want to only put a couple of chips in the center and keep the rest of that in the kitty, and make sure that that's saved for a rainy day. Now, I don't know where you fit in that regard, but that might change as markets go up and down. I guess we've been in a relatively interesting market in the last 2 years or so, and I think in a much more interesting market in the not too distant future. If you want to have where my read of the market is, I'm going to encourage you to go back to a previous Sunday session called Over the Horizon, where you can see how I teach what are the indicators that I want to think about. So what is called a driver? What is a market driver? And there are 16 different market drivers. How do you tell where the market is going? By understand what the drivers are that is actually going to push it somewhere. Okay. Eric has asked a question. Does anyone know where to find good price growth charts for suburbs? And in particular, he's wanting Logan Shire Council. Eric, there's lots of different places you can actually go to purchase, I guess, these charts, and there are individual property economists out there who will actually charge you some good money to do the market research that you actually want to do, that is very targeted. So they won't just look at price growth charts, but they'll look at a whole bunch of other factors sitting in there, including some of the things that I was just talking about a moment ago with the 16 core drivers. So you can spend some very, very good coin trying to get some excellent advice. Okay. Now you might pay anywhere from $200 to one of these reports through to $2,000, maybe $3,000 for them. So they are going to give you, I guess, very, very detailed information about what is actually happening in that area, though. If you're wanting something a little bit more budget, which is, I think, from how I'm reading and interpreting your question, then you want to be potentially using tools like National Property Data, where what they do is so National Property Data is a platform that is very similar in nature to, I guess, what you're probably familiar with RP data, price finder, etc. So what they do is a suburb profile report. The suburb profile report will have a look at a whole bunch of things, some of which are in those really expensive reports. It's going to give you the demographics of an area. It's going to give you the typical age, whether they're typically male or female. Are they all younger in generation? Are they all older in generation? What is the typical income stream? They typically work from home. Are they typically, blue collar or white collar workers? What is the typical income stream for, and typical mortgage as well for particular demographics? So you're going to get a very good view as to the also ethnicity and a whole bunch more. So that's going to give you some very good view of who is actually living in that area, what is actually happening in that area. So that will give you some good indications. Plus the price growth charts that you're actually talking about. So the median house price of an area and what that has actually done over time. Now, as a member of our PDN community, if you mention Property Developer Network when you reach out to National Property Data, they will give you a discount. So reach out to the guys at National Property Data, and they would be more than happy to help you out. Now, next one, Trev. Trev says, quick query to ask you about what sort of percentage profit on GRV, gross realised value, and or profit on cost people are generally aiming for when using the Quick Feaso product. I'm using it for the first time and know the site and projects have massive potential, but the percentage seems low. It seems like a great tool, just trying to get familiar with it. Much help would be greatly appreciated. So firstly, let's talk about what Quick Feaso is. So Quick Feaso is a tool of mine that you can actually click on that link below and actually go and have a look at that tool. It's going to help you to do your feasibilities, and it uses the methodology that I teach in a 3-stage Feaso. There is a quick and dirty Feaso that you can do literally in 10 minutes. It is not intended to be down to the dollar accurate, but rather, are you within an order of magnitude profitability of a site, in which case do you justify putting more effort in. It then steps into round 2 level of accuracy, which is what I internally call a 2-hour check. And this is what I teach our students, where you try to identify every single issue and challenge and problem that you're going to have on the site, and try to put a cost and a line item against every single one of those. And then round 3 version of accuracy. So again, it's not down to the dollar accurate, but it gets tighter in accuracy. So it gets very, very close to the level of accuracy. And then there's the due diligence version of that, where there's well over 300 line items of things that you want to make sure that you check off and that you've actually got a solution for and a price point for, so you can actually go and engage with every single one of your consultants, get all the quotes and get down to the dollar accurate. So those 3 different layers means that you can very, very quickly go, do I want to waste any time spending all my time on the rest of this Feaso? Okay, so that's what Quick Feaso is about, and you can get that by clicking on that link below. Now, as to your question, let me re-sanity check the question. What sort of percentage profit on GRV or profit on costs are you aiming for? So the first things first, Trev, is that most people are aiming for 20% profit on cost. Okay, this is a mythical number that has been, I guess, sitting around since Noah was a boy. Somebody was a boy. All the way back since the dawn of time, let's just say. And it's based on the fact that most of the projects that are known, I guess, or typically thought of when thinking about property development, are typically projects that are like a townhouse type project, where it takes about 2 years to run. Okay, and so unless you get a 20% profit on cost on a project like that, then it's not worth doing the project. Now, what it doesn't take into account, though, is that it's not the only type of development that actually sits out there. And there are many, many other types of development that are much shorter in duration. Okay, so you can have projects that turn over in a month. You can have projects that turn over in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, etc. And so when you're looking at a percentage profit on cost, the thing that most people are not considering is the time element of this, okay? So what I'm going to encourage you to do is to do the same. If you're aiming for a 20% profit on cost on a 2-year project, then let's annualize that so we can compare every single project against each other. So when you annualize a 2-year project that's 20% profit on cost, it works out annualized to be a 10% return. Okay. Now, if you do a 3-month project and you're getting a 7% return, well, when you annualize that, that's a 28% annualized return. Now, which one has your money working harder? That's the kind of thing that you want to be starting to think about, okay? So unless you're getting a minimum of 10% annualized, you're not really comparing with that, I guess, the typical growth that everyone's actually aiming for. But equally, when you're only getting a 7% return, that does not mean it's a bad deal if the time is only a 3-month project. It does mean it's a bad deal, though, if it's a 12-month project. And it certainly means it's a terrible deal if it's a 2-year project, okay? And so the time perspective is the one that everyone tends to miss in making that assessment. So hoping that helps understand that. Next one comes from Rahul. Rahul says, hi everyone, I'm trying to get the development approval alerts and see the DA approvals launched in my area here in Sydney. Rob has mentioned this a website in Bootcamp, so Rahul is a student of mine, but I missed that part, and can someone please help me with that? So firstly, Rahul, you shouldn't have missed it, mate. All of that is recorded. You can go back and actually have a look. So go back and have a look. But for everyone else's benefit, because I'm a really kind-hearted person, the website is called planningalerts.org. So planningalerts.org. Now, what this is, just so that everyone's aware, it's a website that is built by the community to go and read all the different development websites out there. So all the different council websites who have very, very different ways of capturing or reporting on development approvals. So there's 537 different councils out there, which means that 537 different ways they actually advertise what their development approvals actually are. And so this uses a technology called screen scraping, which goes and reads the council website and it says, I know exactly that in the top left-hand corner, about 3 centimeters down and 2 centimeters across, is the exact field that says the development application number. And also, if you go a little bit further down, the next field down, it says, well, this is going to tell me the development type. So is it a subdivision, a townhouse, etc. So what it does is it knows exactly how to read that website, and every single day it goes in and checks again and again and again and again, and it just captures that data and puts it into, I guess, their database, which you can then subscribe to, and then you get the alerts to say, well, who is doing everything everywhere. The problem with screen scraping technology, 1, it's clunky, and 2, if the council changes the website in any way, shape or form, it has the tendency to break the screen scraper. And as such, you can't get 1,000% reliability on tools such as that, but there's not many other tools out there other than paid services. Okay, so the paid services, I guess, very, very expensive in nature, whereas Planning Alerts is free. I guess planningalerts.org is the one that you're actually looking for. Okay, next one comes from Jack. Jack says, are there any builder developers in here that can share some light on being the owner of the development? Sorry, any builder/developers, so someone who is both the builder and the developer in here, that can shed some light about being the owner of the development and also the owner of the building company. I've been told that this can't be done. How did you work around this? So firstly, Jack, it absolutely can be done, being the owner of the development site and also the owner of the development entity. The challenge that you've got is, I guess, being able to separate the roles and responsibilities, and also making sure that you are going to asset protect both the building entity and the development entity not only just from each other, but also the ongoing warranty obligation that tends to come along with selling a property. So the last thing you want to have is a project that goes remarkably well, and your entity makes a whole bunch of money, and that money is sitting here, and then the next project you do, it makes more money, and the next project, it makes more money, and the project after that, something goes horribly wrong, and you've got this big cash kitty that gets very, very attractive for somebody to actually start to come after. And so if you're doing the development entity and the building entity in the same entity, and you do that over and over and over, then you're starting to collect quite a I guess a hefty war chest that somebody is wanting to come after if for some reason the foundations sink, or if the roof leaks, or something along those lines. And so you want to make sure that you're, I guess, disengaging those entities from each other. Now, the best person to give you the advice on that will be your solicitor. And there's many ways that you can actually do this. So I'm not going to give you how. Okay, again, can't give you advice, but what I can tell you is make sure those entities are separate from each other, and also make sure, I guess you also speak to your accountant to make sure that you can do this tax effectively and not overly indulge in some of those things, okay? So otherwise what you might find is that the revenue from I guess that combined entity is a massive, massive chunky bit of revenue. And then the next year you haven't got a project on and you get no revenue. So you get really lumpy revenue, and then nothing, and then lumpy, and then nothing. And the ATO doesn't know how to treat you. And what they're going to do is they're going to try and smooth that out and say, well, because it's lumpy, I want you to pay what is called PAYG, pay as you go tax, where every single quarter, whether you earn money or not, you need to pay the ATO because they know that when it comes in these giant chunks. And so they want to make sure that they can smooth that out and ensure that they actually get their revenue on time. So be super careful with that. And lucky last question comes from, I think it's from Zaina, okay? Okay, Zaina says, hi all, pretty new to this sort of stuff. Does anyone here run the civil side of things themselves rather than hiring a civil company to do the whole lot? I'm doing a 2 into 4 lot subdivision and I'm planning on project managing it, or am I crazy? Zaina, you're crazy. And I don't mean that in any negative way, shape or form, but in order to take that on, unless you are, I guess, years and years of experience in actually how to do these things, you're physically just not going to have the skill set in order to do that. And on top of that, most jurisdictions, when you're talking about your civil side of things, will have to have what is called endorsed consultants to actually perform the work and sign off on the work. So for you to take that on yourself does not make both commercial sense nor logical sense in order to do that. So be very, very careful in wanting to take that on. Now, project managing that, absolutely. So if you can find the correct people in the skill, you've said that you're a project manager, if you can find the correct consultants in order to do that, but that is just being a development manager in and of its own right. So there's no difference to you doing that and engaging those consultants directly. But please, please, please don't take that on, and especially don't get on the digger yourself. Very, very tempting. I love heavy machinery and that sort of thing. But I guess you don't want to take on that kind of solution. Anyway, folks, I hope you got plenty out of that particular episode or today's episode of Open Mic Night. And if you want to ask me any questions for next time, please make sure that you submit your questions in advance. That helps me to put together a really good show for you guys. In the meantime, folks, just want to give you a heads up that we run our networking events all the way around the country. We run these in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. And so you can see them at any one of those locations. Plus, we also live stream them. So no matter where you're physically located, you can actually dial into these events. Very, very worthwhile. developernetwork.com.au/events. Folks, hope you got plenty out of today's show, and I cannot wait to see you at one of our upcoming events. Till then, I'm going to say bye for now. Bye.